Warning, viewers' discretion is advised as this may contain mature or triggering content. Title: Unexpected Fates, Part 8. When Ervo hit the ground within the cave, he braced for an attack, but it never came. What he found was Ceres on the floor staring at him in shock. But Myrna wasn't anywhere in sight. Great. He moved to Ceres' side. "Hey man, what took you so long?" Ervo said with a slight chuckle as he mocked Ceres' voice, figuring that would be the first thing Ceres would say if he could speak. As soon as Ervo had entered, Ceres felt a portion of his power flowing back into his body. Not to mention, he was slowly starting to feel his body again. Yes, his body had been numb thanks to the drugs Myrna had been pouring down his throat. Where is she? Ervo asked through their mental connection. "I don't know. How could you just barge in here without a plan?" Ervo chuckled. "Well, we had one. But if she's gone, it could make things simpler." Right as he spoke, a darkness swept into the cave, and he turned. Myrna's dark energy was closing in, and it was moving fast. It seemed their plan would play out well after all. She burst through the entrance, her weapon drawn, and Ervo merely held his hands up. Jeez, Myrna. He still couldn't believe Myrna's soft features had turned so hard, her pink eyes now blood red, making him feel sick, as if showing him how much blood she had spilled in her endeavors to make Ceres hers. "What exactly are you doing here, Ervo?" No. Better yet, how did you get in here? I could feel your power from miles away. If you were trying to free him, you should have been a bit more stealthy about it," she said before slinking towards him, her sword firmly gripped in her hands. "I'm not looking for a fight, Myrna. I couldn't leave Ceres here thinking we had abandoned him. I don't understand how Bree could even think about such a thing. I wanted to see if we could work out some kind of deal. I don't want to lose anyone else." Myrna sneered at him. "Oh, really?" Ervo nodded. "I don't even mind if I have to make more creations for you and your monster to kill. Ceres is like a brother to me. After losing Garv, I held you and him close to my heart, even though Bree had a majority of it. Even after finding out you were the one who killed Garv, it hurt, but we grew up together. I can't understand your reasons. I just don't want to lose anyone else. I'm sorry we abandoned you on Estral." Now Myrna was laughing in Ervo's face. "Wait a minute. You, who loves and adores your creations, you are willing to let me kill some of them, just so you don't lose any more of our group, including me?" Ervo groaned. "Yes, Myrna. I know I sound crazy, but Breetina has tried taking on your job, and I'm not sure if she's up for that." "Whoa, really?" "Instead of letting Nuwa create or introduce you to new people, Breetina took the burden of different roles? No wonder she seems so cold about this. Oh, that is laughable. Maybe I fell in love with the wrong guy. What would you say to becoming mine, Ervo?" "Oh, well, of course Ceres would still be mine as well." Ervo instantly shook his head. "No, sorry, but Bree is the only one for me." A small smirk still covered Myrna's face as she gave a relaxed shrug with a roll of her eyes. "Starting to think I really did target the wrong man. You know, Ervo, if I had a thing for green-haired men, I might consider, changing my affection like all your pathetic creations do. Toying and disgracing the precious gift and blessing of pure emotions for something unnatural and fake. But if I did that, it would put me on the same level as them, and I would never allow that. Besides, you aren't attractive to me in the slightest." Ervo sneered at her. Well, aren't I just lucky? Let's get back to our original conversation. Would you be willing to make a deal? Maybe we could make it so you took over the deaths of all the creations, providing you make those with decent standing, peaceful deaths, and anyone who is evil, you can torment to your heart's content. After all, Britina only needs to collect their souls. Myrna watched him, a bit shocked by his words, but she allowed none of her shock to show. Oh, really? You were serious about this? Ervo nodded. You should know I don't joke about such things. Myrna's sword vanished. Well, I suppose that's true. Whenever there was a serious matter, you never accepted any of my jokes. Such a party pooper. She tapped an L against her lips and thought. Okay, she said with a sly smirk. Not even a second after, she agreed, Britina appeared in the cave, making Myrna flinch. Britina's red eyes fierce as she glared at Myrna. After everything, you still came here, she shouted. Ervo and Myrna flinched at Britina's venom-filled voice. He held up his hands, stepping between Myrna and her. Bree, calm down. Please. We can just let bygones be bygones, okay? Myrna even agreed to not kill recklessly. You wouldn't have to be involved in our creation's deaths anymore. You could simply collect their souls. Wouldn't that be... His words froze in his throat at the fierce coldness in Britina's eyes. If this hadn't been an act, he was sure Britina wouldn't talk to him for ages after this. She killed Garv. She killed Estral, our first world that was thriving with life. It was perfect, and she ruined it with her selfish desires. Myrna chuckled. This is splendid. You're still both so adorable with your quarrels. Stay out of this, Britina growled. She held up her hands, the smirk still on her face. Okay, I'll hush for now. She glanced at Ceres, and her brow furrowed as she noticed his fingers twitch. She frowned. Actually, let's go elsewhere. I don't want you two disturbing my lover with your stupid argument, even though we all know where the final decision will end. Britina huffed. Fine. I would rather not talk about this in front of Ceres anyways. But I'll tell you now, this decision has not been made. There is no way, unless there's some undeniable reason you can show me to accept this horrid deal of his. Where should we go? Myrna shrugged. Have it your way. Follow me. Myrna's focus was simply getting Ervo and Britina away from Ceres. It was clear their power was helping him get back to his normal state. That was something she couldn't have, even if he wasn't back up and running completely. If all three of them were together, Nero and her likely wouldn't win. Speaking of her minion, she heard his voice echo in her mind. Do you need me to return? She shook her head as they moved out of the cave. No. I can handle these bickering fools. You focus on your mission, finding the core. There was silence for a moment, and Myrna thought Nero would disobey her, before hearing him utter yes. Myrna smiled. Emerite had told her about the planet's core. It was the absolute life and power of the planet, holding a connection to the house of whichever god created the celestial that made that planet. In a sense, it was the key to breaking into Nuwa's home, and finding her heart to destroy her, which was exactly what Emerite wanted. Myrna had to admit she had been shocked by the power behind Britina and Ervo. She figured they had created some type of creature that boosted their powers, just as Nero did for her. Myrna wasn't sure if it meant they were ready to fight, or simply using it as a mean to defend themselves if needed. It wasn't like it would matter. All she had to do was snap her fingers and Nero would teleport right to her. Even with a power boost, they wouldn't be a match for Nero's power-devouring ability. As fun as it was watching Ervo and Britina bicker, she was growing impatient. They were a decent distance from the cave, and she was sure it was good enough not to give Ceres any more strength. "So, Britina, care to tell me why Ervo's plan is so terrible? We can all go back to the good old days, right? You and Ervo together, Ceres and I. Aren't we just the perfect group to work together?" Britina's body visibly shook with anger. "Everything! You want me to turn a blind eye to everything you've done to us? Garv's death, ruining Estral, harming the people of Kaya, even the painful death you'll give Ceres, forcing your so-called affection on him. You are entirely the problem, and you shouldn't exist." She was huffing as she finished, jabbing a finger into Myrna's chest. Myrna stared at the nail stabbing faintly into her chest. Her eyes narrowed and she grabbed Britina's hand, jerking her closer. "It's not forcing him if he actually loves me," her lips whispered inches from Britina's ear, making her shiver. Britina ripped herself away from Myrna. "You are so damn delusional." Myrna shrugged, her arms crossing over her chest. "Am I? Then tell me, why was Ceres willing to hide the fact I killed Garv from you two?" Her words made the two of them freeze. Why had he? They had never thought to ask him. Another chuckle left Myrna as she watched them. "Besides, how long has it been since Garv's death? That was so long ago. I practically can't even remember his face." Tears pricked Britina's eyes. "You were so foul. I hate you. Now you're trying to turn us against Ceres? How? How can you be so twisted?" A mischievous smirk crossed Myrna's lips. If she'd known it'd be this easy to dig into their hearts, she would have done so from the start. Somewhere near the core, Nero's claws sank into the dirt of the world, and he felt it tremble under his paws. He was sure Myrna would praise him greatly for finding the core so quickly. While he couldn't enter, Myrna could. It irked him he had to allow Myrna to go on such a dangerous journey alone. He wanted to be by her side, now and always. This was what Amorite had promised him. In fact, Nero's soul held remnants of Garv's soul. Myrna had no idea about it, though. Amorite had promised to complete his body, so he could return to Myrna's side. He was already tainted by those he had killed for Myrna. A small part of him felt regret for hurting Ceres, Ervo, and Britina, but he couldn't help it. If Myrna had just opened up to him, if he were alive in his true form, he would have done whatever she had requested. A strange chuckle left his throat. There was no humor in it. It was bitter and twisted. Nero was pulled from his thoughts as a strange golden hue filled the skies, and then golden dust wafted down. The particles burned as they landed on him. Hissing, he backed up, hiding under a large tree, waiting for the strange stuff to go away. Nero felt a chill cross his skin as the golden dust began to swirl in front of him. It only took his brain a moment to process as a large white feline body with golden stripes and striking green eyes formed before him. "This will be the end of you," it growled out before lunging at Nero. Nero jerked sideways, the feline's sharp, thick claws barely missing him. He smirked. "So who might you be?" Anwar glowered at the beast as he asked the question, dodging Anwar's simple strikes. "You don't deserve to utter my name, but as your sworn enemy, it is your right to know. Anwar, it is not a pleasure to meet you," he growled. The shadowy beast chuckled. "Nero, it is a pleasure to meet you on my behalf. I shall have fun killing you off. I'm sure if I kill you, my powers will grow. That will bring me closer to my goal." Anwar growled as he watched this being called Nero. "They call you a beast, but for some reason you don't feel completely like an animal. More similar to..." Anwar's words were cut off as Nero's eyes narrowed. "Looks like somebody needs to die before they can share that information." Nero growled, growing serious now. While Nero's portion of the soul couldn't care less about Ceres, Bretina, and Nervo ever figuring out what he was, Garv's soul portion knew what he was doing was wrong, and truthfully, he hoped those three never found out. Anwar's body tensed, and light circled around him. As it did, the shadows around Nero's body were slowly burned away, revealing Nero's true form. A large, almost disproportionate wolf-like creature that held no fur across its black, stretched skin. While Nero's body held muscles, they were seemingly thin for something with so much strength, almost to the point that he could be described as lanky. Rigid ribs stuck out of his sides, and his spine shone through his skin. He didn't seem so menacing anymore. His once deadly-looking fangs awkwardly protruded from his jaws. Everything was simply a mess. It was clear to Anwar that Nero had been created very haphazardly. So unlike himself, who had been created with the utmost care and affection. "I feel bad for you, Nero," he muttered before Nero jumped, his claws hitting home, slicing into Anwar's shoulder. It stung, the first taste of pain, something Anwar knew he didn't want to feel. Nero's jaws tried biting into Anwar's throat, but his thick mane of fur stopped him. It was his turn. Anwar's golden fangs gleamed against the sun before sinking into Nero's collar. A yell of pain left Nero's mouth as he thrashed, making it worse. It burned, as if Anwar's bite alone was sinking light into his blood. Nero twisted more frantically, before ripping himself backwards. As he did so, he felt a chunk of his flesh rip away. It hung in Anwar's bloodied maw. Nero hissed, backing away, blood pouring from the open wound. Anwar didn't give Nero a second before he flung his full weight at him. For the first time, Nero's body trembled with fear. He dodged the attack, swinging his claws as they extended to try and keep distance between them. However, Anwar's attacks were faster, and each time Anwar sank his fangs into Nero's flesh, it seared into his very being, tearing at him, weakening him beyond compare. It wasn't just wounding his body. Anwar's attacks were severing Nero and Garv's souls. They clashed, their fangs, claws, and bodies smashing together for almost an hour before Anwar stood above Nero. Blood coated both of them as they panted. "You are done for," Anwar stated before his jaws locked onto Nero's throat. There was only a faint struggle before Anwar snapped his head right and a cracking sound followed. Nero's body stopped moving, before it slowly started to fade away into a dark mist. Anwar collapsed to the ground, his body reverting back to its smaller form, before vanishing. An hour ago. As planned, Anwar and Nuwa arrived in Kaya at the same time. Anwar's presence was felt throughout the world, while Nuwa masked hers perfectly. She waited for a few minutes before teleporting directly next to Ceres, smiling as shock filled his face. "Sorry it took us so long. But as you know, the finest plans consist of the greatest details." She kneeled down, pressing a hand to his chest, right above his heart and letting her power flow through him. It only took a few minutes before Ceres could feel his entire body once again, and the pain was gone. "I told them I would take you away as soon as I got here. We have a very important matter to discuss, but I know you, and I also have a feeling you already know what it is I am to ask of you." Ceres sat up, stretching out his limbs. "You knew I wouldn't leave until I made sure Myrna was gone and Ervo and Bretina were fine." Nuwa nodded. "I will not intervene any more than I have, unless your life is in danger. Sadly, I cannot say the same for those two. So go, put an end to Myrna." Ceres stared at her before nodding and vanishing without question. His power was overflowing, more than it ever had, her words echoing in his mind. A part of him already knew the reason Nuwa had gotten involved. How? He wasn't sure, but it was as if a voice was whispering inside his mind, telling him, soon, everything would be perfectly aligned. He landed before Ervo and Britina, right as Myrna had launched another attack. His silver wings sprang forward, forming a barrier around Ervo and Britina, before he caught the blade of Myrna's sword with his bare hand. All three of them gasped at his sudden appearance. "How are you here?" Myrna asked, dropping the end of her sword, afraid to hurt Ceres more. As Myrna asked how he was there, Ervo and Britina asked why. Myrna's eyes narrowed. "What have you two done?" Ceres's blood splashed against the dirt, and thick vines exploded from the ground. They swirled around Myrna before snapping tightly around her body, making her gasp in pain. She was strung up in the air, trying to twist free from the binds, but only tearing into her flesh as thorns began to form along it, keeping her perfectly still. "Why, Ceres?" she cried out to him, but his eyes were cool. He turned his back to her and stared at Ervo and Britina. Britina rushed in to hug him. "Sorry, guys," he said as Britina began to cry. He patted her back gently, giving Ervo a nod. He smirked slightly, walking over and smacking Ceres's shoulder. "Where was this power when we needed it?" Ceres chuckled as they ignored Myrna begging to be released. "Things have changed," he said, and it made Ervo and Britina flinch. Did you already accept her deal?" Britina asked in a shaky voice. Ceres nodded. "She hasn't told me about the deal, but somehow I know what it is." Myrna's sudden scream made them turn. What have you done?" she shouted at them, tears and anger flooding her voice. "You killed my pet!" Ceres frowned. "It should have never existed. Honestly, neither should you." Myrna froze, silence filling the air with heavy weight at Ceres's cold words. The vines wrapped around Myrna, brought her down, pulling her closer to Ceres. "Ceres, come on. It's just my love for you. I would do anything for you." The vines stopped, with a simple wave of his hand. "Yes, you would, and that puts the responsibility of dealing with you in my hands." He raised his left hand, cupping Myrna's cheek, and she closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "If you hadn't become this twisted thing, perhaps I could have loved you at one point, Myrna." "You still can. That's all I've ever—" Her eyes flew open as pain exploded through her chest. Ervo and Britina gasped as Ceres's arm ripped through Myrna's chest without hesitation, his hand sticking out of her back, with her heart grasped in it. Tears slid down his face as Myrna coughed, gasping for air, for the pain to end. "Goodbye," Ceres muttered, before his power circled around her heart, and he crushed it, watching it fade into dust, as her body slowly disintegrated along with it. The vines vanished, slithering back into the ground as if they never existed. Ceres flicked his arm, shaking away the remnants of Myrna's slowly fading blood. Ervo and Britina still stood in shock. "Let's go," his voice shaking slightly. The two of them glanced at each other before they closed the distance, each grabbing either one of his hands. They gave him a soft smile before vanishing, teleporting back home. Now that Kaya was restored with peace, it was time to try and restore the peace of their universe. To be continued! I hope you guys are still enjoying this, and yes, there will be a part 9. I think part 9 will be the last one, but I said that about part 8 as well. I have issues. I absolutely love this story, and I've delved so deeply into it that it's really hard for me to put it to an end. But I am like 99.8% sure that part 9 will be the final piece. So, I hope you look forward to that, and if you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!